Hello, it's Robert here for Doomsday Debunked. I thought I'd talk a little bit about how I research an article, research a story that is scaring people, to help other debunkers to see how you do it. So there's a scare at the moment about submarines and people saying that sharing scary stories about 10 Russian submarines heading off into the Atlantic and worried that it's going to start something. And so I go and search for submarines and Norway. And if you look down here, then you see you can look that some of them, submarines may test new weapons off Norway on secret mission, Daily Mail, The Express, on Russian nuclear submarines past UK waters on secret, and you can see that some of those are going to be a bit sensationalist. In this case, luckily, the very first one, it doesn't look terribly sensational, but sometimes the first one will as well. Most often, the first one will as well. So I go and look down, and then it says the Independent Barents Observer. That seems likely, if they're sailing to Barents Sea, that seems likely to be quite an accurate article. So I go and look that up. And then there it says that Russian subs holding cell scales in major North Atlantic drill, says Norwegian intel. So they are actually basing on the Norwegian side. And then they have the link to the original Norwegian site. So then I go and look at that through Google Translate, because this is going to be the least sensationalist if you go back to their source. And so secret submarine operation, the goal is to show that Russia can reach the United States. And they talk about how there's obviously a bit of a problem with presumably it means most of the submarines in the Russian Northern Fleet have tried to sail from their bases without being discovered out into the Barents and Norwegian Sea. And so then you can read about it. And the goal is to show that they're able to defend their bases and threaten the east coast. And so it's a largest Russian submarine operation since the early 1990s in the Cold War days. So it is, they said it's not an exercise, it's an operation to show military force. And then you go on and read about it. And this is probably the best that we can find in Norwegian intelligence about what's going on. And this is what they're doing. They're practicing hiding at great depths, and and they're sending Sierra class ones which can dive very deeply. And this is showing that they can able to get as far into the Atlantic as possible. And so why are they doing it? And the Russians want to say that the Barents Sea is our sea, and we can do this, and that we're able to reach the United States. And the background to this, if you don't know it, is that Russia has been feels quite threatened by the United States, because the United States has developed very strong defences against nuclear missiles, to the extent that Russia is afraid that its old, rather outmoded defence system wouldn't be able to get through it. So therefore they have modernised their defence system, and this is all part of deterrence. There's no intent here to attack the US. They just want to show we are strong, don't attack us. That's the reason for doing this sort of thing. They actually have a stronger policy than the United States. Putin has said very clearly that Russia would not use nuclear weapons unless the integrity of Russia itself was at stake. There's some big massive invasion of Russia or something similar. So that background, you need quite a lot of searching to find that background. I've got some articles about it, but I'm just talking about how you find out about the basic story, and then it does help if you've got some background. But then a little bit more background on this particular thing. I searched around, and I eventually found this article. Now, where was it? In a remote Norwegian Arctic outpost, Norway keeps watch on Russia. So that seems likely to tell me a little bit more about what's going on, and why does Norway want to keep Russia on Russia. These were some of the other ones that were rather scary, and they were clearly a little bit sensational. So I looked at those, but I skipped out of them. And so here we come back to this one, which looks like it's going to be quite informative, and it is indeed. It was a very good article, and it talked about how Russia, how the Norwegians are keeping a close eye on Russia, and that Russia has lots of commercial interests in the Barents Sea, and generally the warming temperatures are opening up the shipping lanes in the Arctic, and they're uncovering the polar region's abundant natural resources. And so several nations, not just Russia, are engaging in a military build-up in the Arctic. So Russia is upgrading its military capabilities with new fighter jets and navy vessels, and its Russian submarines pushing further into the Atlantic. And it's carrying cruise missile tests and live-fire military exercises, and that is forcing its neighbour Norway and other NATO members to rethink their military strategy in the region. So that's the real background to this, is that the Arctic is, because of the melting of the Arctic, the more ice being freed, because of global warming, the Arctic has less ice, which means there's a lot more commercial interest in the Arctic. And so, for that reason, naturally, people different countries are flexing their military might. You may have heard recently Trump joking, well, he didn't. He was actually serious about it, but to everyone else, it was pretty much a joke, talking about how the United States wants to buy Greenland, and that would be part of the same thing. They want to have a foothold in the Arctic. Greenland, of course, said they're not for sale. So there is quite a lot going on there, and it's actually quite an interesting question. Again, this is background you won't know if you haven't read up a fair bit, but it's actually quite an interesting thing of what's going to happen as we warm up. Already the Arctic is much more commercial interest because of the warming so far. And if we get up to 1.5 degrees C, it'll be even more warmed up. And if we went all the way to 2 degrees C, even more. And then you'll have a lot of commercial interest in the area. And there may be ways that we can go all the way back to pre-industrial. I've got this article about how giant kelp farming in the oceans, in the middle of the oceans, which is very sustainable, at least according to the preliminary paper on it. It can be done in such a way it has almost no impact on the oceans. It combined with fish farming and growing lots of giant kelp, then we could feed ourselves from the oceans with much more than we do at present, with much less impact on the natural ecosystems. And so if that is correct, and then you could use the giant kelp for biofuel, if this is correct, then as they work, they are already using more and more seaweed for such things as food directly, and for biofilm you can of course eat seaweed and feed it to things. Then if they did do this massive expansion, then it is one feasible way to eventually reduce carbon dioxide levels back to pre-industrial. And there's an interesting paper about that. Is that something that we would really want to do? Because by then we'd have lots of vested interests in the Arctic, and who are used to the Arctic being a little bit warmer, and you would be talking about dismantling billion-dollar industries if you're going to go back to pre-industrial. And we would have adapted our crops to the warmer temperatures in the tropics. There's already a lot of work being done on that. For instance, a possibility of transferring C4 photosynthesis from maize to rice, which is much more difficult than most genetic engineering, but we could be able to do it within a decade or two. By 2050, we may have rice that is much better at growing in tropical conditions than it can now, and the various other things, wheat that can grow in very salty conditions, so as to cope with sea level rise, and flooding, and making the ground more salty. And our world would be adjusted to those conditions by 2050 with all the adaptations. Even at 1.5 degrees C, we will be doing some adaptation, the extra sea walls and the crops that are improved for slightly warmer conditions. And would we then want to go back to 1 degree C like we are now? Even with all the transition and even with the extra hurricanes, well, the hurricane just a little bit stronger, but then we would have built to resist stronger hurricanes in places in the States, for instance, that never had hurricanes before, will now be hurricane resistant, and so on. And so it would be a big question with many people, a lot of decisions either way. Do we as a world want to go back to 1 degree C as we are now, or even back to pre-industrial? It certainly seems technically possible that we will, in one way or another, be able to do that. I would say, what with the advances in science and also these new ideas like giant kelp, and there's also growing green algae for fuel, and this has never quite taken off yet, but it has far more, you can capture far more carbon dioxide in the same period of time than plants can. And if we could use algae for biofuel and then burn the biofuel with biofuel capture and storage, then this could be a way of also of taking a lot of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And then the various technological ways of doing it that's being explored. They are definitely, all this is pretty much unproved technology. I would say the giant sea kelp is not, that's very low technology, but it does need a lot of care into looking into very carefully the actual impact of covering our oceans with large areas of giant kelp. It's the preliminary study looks as if it's very low impact on our ecosystems. One way or another, I think we will have the capability to take the carbon dioxide out, at least in the second half of the century, and then it'll be a big question as to whether that's what we want to do. So in the 2018 report, they talked about how if we overshoot to 2 degrees C, it would be, they only used, though, present-day technology, burning biomass from growing trees and sugarcane and stuff like that. And with that, then it's really quite a high impact on our ecosystems. But it is possible that by 2050, we have low-impact ways of doing it. Of course, they can't use unproved technology that we haven't created yet. They only used technology already proven at an industrial scale in the reports. So anyway, that's background information you wouldn't know, but to go, unless you've been following it. But just to summarize, the way to deal with this is that to go down the results and search for the least sensational looking, which if you're panicking, you're not likely to do that. You're going to go and find, oh, they're going to test new weapons, oh dear, it's secret, and you end up, and especially since with other searches, those would probably go to the first. We're quite lucky that this one a good one went to the first. And then when you go to this one, you would probably just take this on the face of it, which is this is a little bit slightly, it's not too bad, but it's slightly hyped up a little bit. And it doesn't really explain that the background, and then you go to there, which gives you go to that one, which gives much more detail, the actual Russian one, and it's slightly lower key than that. Every time it gets repeated, it tends to get a little bit hyped up by the journalists. So it always helps to go back to the sources of whatever you're reading. And so you keep going back to what seems to be the most likely to be the most reliable source, and then you also try and find out a little bit about the background. And if you do that, then you will have a much more effective debunk